podcast where we listen to a Dharma talk, contemplate with our minds and in our hearts, and engage in guided meditation. In this episode, we look at New-ness. Every episode of PRAJNA Sparks takes hours to plan, record, and edit. We ask that you give us some time today to subscribe, like, and review our podcast. Alongside your own practice, this is the best possible offering as it helps the Dharma reach new listeners.
With the Tibetan New Year, just now as this episode is dropping, Lama Yeshe and I thought it would be a lovely time to have a bit of discussion about newness, about the turning of the year, about how we look into our practice at the end of an old year and rejuvenate it, renew it, rejoicing in what's gone well, recognizing the places where we've fallen short or just haven't quite accomplished what we would have liked, and coming up with a new plan or approach for this upcoming year, envisioning all the goodness that can come through living well in the Dharma, through cultivating our own well-being emotionally, spiritually, physically, through the practice of taking stock. I thought that maybe we could start by talking about what it's like at the end of the year and why it can be so beneficial to take stock, and what happens traditionally in Tibetan monasteries at the end of the lunar year.
I'm always struck by this question, usually at the end of the Western calendar year, just because it's a much bigger deal, obviously, in our culture. There's a lot more to do. There's the big New Year's Eve celebrations, etc. And there just seems to be something about human nature that gets sparked afresh by marking an ending, even if it's an arbitrary ending. And frankly, to some extent, it is arbitrary. Certainly, it's the end of a calendar. That's a clear line, but the calendar is an arbitrary thing, and so is the lunar calendar. You could have chosen some other system for telling time. Leaving that aside, which system do we use? That doesn't really matter so much. That's the arbitrary part. Still, there seems to be something that really is rejuvenating, refreshing, and enlivening about starting afresh, turning a clean page on a new chapter of our lives. I always love that the Tibetan New Year follows somewhat closely after the Western one. This year it's quite close. Losar comes very early in the Western calendar on February 10th, 2024. And I find it especially valuable when this happens because right about now is the time that the resolutions we made on January 1st start to fray. And I love having yet another fresh start to begin all over again and to reflect and take stock of where we are, as you say, Zopa.
I appreciate that. It's almost like it's recognizing how much we are a part of nature. Of course, I mean, that's obvious in many ways, but I feel like so often we forget it. This particular aspect of new year, new leaf, starting afresh, that mimics or follows the seasonal changing as well. It's like this dark fecund time of winter, at least in the northern hemisphere, feels like it's this little boiling pot that helps us imagine what's possible. And then with spring just around the corner, particularly in the Tibetan calendar, it makes us have that sense of freshness, of starting anew. Maybe we should talk a little bit at first about how this is usually approached in Tibetan monasteries that we're familiar with.
Certainly in Tibet, Nepal, India, the very large monasteries have very elaborate ceremonies. But even in the Americas and Europe, Tibetan Dharma centers will often offer some form of celebration, be it similar to the pujas or ritual practices in the Asian setting or some other way of celebrating and marking that off. I also just really want to reflect what you said, because I was talking about human nature having something within them that enjoys this refreshing process. But you're right. It's very much a natural cycle, something that we see amongst seasons, amongst animals, not just groundhogs, all kinds of shifting from one cycle to another throughout the year. And to some extent, we see that process of laying things bare and reviving again in the ceremonies around Losar, or Tibetan New Year.
I appreciate especially the sense of purification, of removing of obstacles right at the close of the old year as a way of making room for new growth, making room for the new year to be one of prosperity, of auspiciousness, of joy and genuine well-being. The way this usually comes up in many of the Kagyu monasteries is that there's a period of protector practice done to remove obstacles at the end of the old year. Some monasteries do this for 10 days, 2 weeks, things like that, leading up to the new year, going full around the clock, saying these protector practice rituals as a way of removing any obstacles that have come up, not just for the individuals or the monastery, but for the world, for all of us, as a way to remove hindrances. It also taps into the sense of purification that I think many of us have and feel, of wanting to let go of mistakes that we've made, wanting to capitalize on what we've learned throughout the year. And it's so beautiful to have this encapsulated ritually through the practice, first of these very intense protector practices, and then on Losar Day itself to have practices like smoke offerings and white Tara and auspiciousness prayers that feel very celebratory and joyous as a way of consciously looking forward to the new year as being something positive that we can engage with.
Yes, some of the practices are also very symbolic. As a high point in these protective practices, be they 2 weeks long or a week, or sometimes in Dharma centers in the Americas and Europe, it might be just a day or a few days. However long those practices go on, there's typically some kind of fire purification that happens, either a very large fabric statue of sorts that's pulled together as part of the purification practice and becomes the focus of absorbing any kind of negativity, in which you can actually symbolically include a piece of fabric or writing something down on a piece of paper that you want to release and so forth. And I think this is something that can be done on a very simple scale, just individually at home. Letting go, releasing, and completely incinerating things that are no longer serving us, so that out of those ashes, that beautiful fire of freshness, aliveness, and light can come forward.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because we are big fans of ritual as a way to communicate meaning in a more powerful way that often gets ignored or left behind in today's contemporary society. So it can be quite useful in whatever way feels true to us, but particularly in some of these more traditional forms where each aspect has very powerful symbolic meaning that even if we don't understand it fully or consciously know it, some aspect of ourselves picks up on. So then how can we as individuals work with this time of year, whether we're talking about Western New Year or the Tibetan New Year that is currently happening? How do we make good use of that in terms of our Dharma practice?
Well, I think one thing that is very helpful about Tibetan New Year is that it does come sometime after the January 1st celebrations, and maybe we're a little humbled by our sense of scale in our resolutions and so forth. Maybe we can use that to ground ourselves, to really have our aspirations both be bold and beautiful and out of proportion to anything that could be happening. At the same time that our feet are firmly planted on the ground and we recognize that this is going to happen step by step. To me, this is a really powerful paradox that we hold, recognizing that our nature is limitless, full of power that is boundless in extent. And yet, as we are expressing right now, as we manifest right now, we have some immediate limitations that we are sloughing away, letting go of. And so this moment of Tibetan New Year is a particularly good moment to just allow ourselves to step into that liminal space between the letting go and the flying high. With that as a mindset, we can undertake however simple or elaborate a ritual makes sense for us and our particular preferences, because it's that intention, that mindset that brings the sacred into the everyday life that ritual is all about. So I think the most important thing is that general framework. That's what matters the most to me. And then it will probably vary year by year how that expresses. When we're at Pulahari Monastery in Nepal for Losar, the rituals can be elaborate indeed. We have an entire fleet of monks and nuns in our monastery and monasteries and nunneries around us in Nepal that are all engaged in these practices. But even here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, we have a lovely Dharma center about a mile away from us, Tagyushin Pinling, where we have the great honor to participate in the Losar practices and to bring that mindset of letting go and inviting into our mind and heart as we engage in those practices.
Beautiful. I love the sense of the poignancy of ending as well, that the practice of reviewing the year brings to us. There's that very vivid, visceral sense of recognizing the seasons of our life passing, recognizing and giving rise to a bit of humility, like you were saying, of, wow, this is another year gone by. What have I learned? What am I integrating? What do I want to change and do better, particularly in terms of my practice? One of the frameworks that I like to use myself is this model of view, meditation, and conduct, where I take stock of my understanding of reality, of the world, of myself, of the path of practice, and seeing how much my actions and my practice are in line with that. And when they're not in line with that, then there's some sense of, okay, this hasn't really settled deeply into my being as much as it just being surface level understanding. Investigating in that way can give rise to enthusiasm for moving forward, for what I can do for this year. So one of the ways that I like to rejuvenate my practice is to just take stock in that way and to form a very conscious intention, like Lama Yeshe was just mentioning, that carries some weight going forward. Not just a sense of where I'm going, but also a feeling of enthusiasm, of enjoyment for the Dharma. As we've talked about before, diligence, this word in Tibetan that we commonly translate as diligence, actually means delighting in virtue. So if we can tap into that delight, then that gives us great starting power right off the bat.
Yeah, and there's so many different ways of doing it that if I have to pick practices that bring those forward, other than, of course, the practices that we've been talking about, the protective practices and the Losar practices in general, there's something about the purification practices of either the prayer to the 35 Buddhas or Vajrasattva practice, if you're doing a Vajrayana level of practice, that I found really helpful as a way of letting go. There's a real sense of bringing the energy of acknowledging and owning responsibility for our actions, and then releasing any guilt, any harmfulness, and any inclination to go down that path again. So really allowing that field of our mind to be replenished by taking out all the gunk that we can handle, having that soil be ready and ripe for fertilizer, water, the warmth of the sun. This is a very common example in traditional teachings. And then a practice that's very near and dear to my heart, the White Tara practice, to me is one that's very much about abundance and at the same time protection. When we plant a garden in the early parts of spring, we put in seeds or maybe seedlings, and you have to have some kind of little protective sphere around them so that the little fragile seedlings can grow into a little more strength before they can go forth robustly. And White Tara practice really brings both of those elements forward, purifying the ground, getting rid of any impediments, stones, twigs, gunk in the soil, and then really planting new seeds, protecting them, gently allowing them to be nurtured as they grow and establish themselves as strong, abundant crops that can be harvested in their plentiful goodness. This is, to me, the exact sense of this rather arbitrary point of ending and beginning.
I'd love to hear, if you don't mind sharing, what you personally found over this past year and what you're looking forward to going into the new year.
One of the things over the last year that I've been so grateful for is the variety of things that I've been able to do in a public forum. This podcast, the Opening Dharma Access podcast that I was very honored to co-host, the various public teachings that we offer through Prajna Fire, and different articles that I was pleased and honored to write for Buddha Dharma and Lion's Roar. It just felt like a very plentiful, diverse set of Dharma activities. Going forward into the new year, I'd like those to build a momentum for some inward turned time for more private practice, more writing. So for those of you who get our Substack newsletter, you already know that I'll be doing a sabbatical year this year, not in a sense of a complete cloister, but doing less publicly oriented activities as I've done over the last year and spending more time with my private practice, private teaching students, my translation practice, both in writing and for live teachings, and other projects that mean a lot to me. How about you, Zopa?
Beautiful. In this time of contemplation, I'm feeling like this past year has been quite meaningful for me. There's been some mundane activities that have kept me busy, that I've enjoyed, and that have also felt like they've been able to benefit my ability to engage with others in meaningful ways. And now that that's come to a bit of a close, I'm really excited for this year to focus again on rejuvenating my in-depth Vajrayana practice, for taking time to get really familiar again, get into that intimacy that some of the Yidam practices bring with different aspects of mind, with different aspects of this great big imaginative power that Vajrayana taps into and that feels so nourishing in ways that are hard to articulate and yet feel like they feed me really deeply. So I'm also reminded of the teaching in the Chenri Z practice about the primary difficulty or suffering in the human realm being that of too much busyness. And that's something I have to look at really closely in myself and see if I'm nurturing contentment that is conducive to Dharma. So I'm loving this time of year. I'm loving this and this conversation, Yeshe.
Yes, definitely. Such a wonderful cusp And this brings me to the final point I'd like to talk with you about, which we've been skirting all along. If this is an arbitrary end and an arbitrary beginning, then what is it all about? In many ways, we can just, again, hold a paradox of freshness beginning as the stale year ends, at the same time that we recognize that it is a continuation, a march of moments, in the example of time or the calendar, one after another, each so similar to the one beforehand and to the one afterwards that it's kind of hard to tell the difference unless there is something arbitrary that comes in and says, okay, this is the end of that and the beginning of this. And we see that throughout our lives. And of course, at the very beginning and at the very end of our lives. So much of Dharma practice, particularly in the Vajrayana, is about laying the groundwork to recognize these moments of continuation that have particular heft or importance. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear what you think about this sense of continuation that is happening even as we are celebrating newness.
I think you nailed it, and with the sense of paradox, of holding this recognition of all of these moments flowing ceaselessly almost through our fingers. I find it so poignant in the meditations and contemplations on impermanence when they talk about life being like water rushing over a cliff or sand slipping through your fingers. That sense of there's never a pause. It's always going. And so recognizing that moment by moment newness and freshness, of course, it can bring up a little bit of perhaps anxiety or amazement at the ceaseless rush of time, but that stepping into the uncertainty, stepping into change with this brave, bold heart, that to me is what practice is all about. Learning to tap into our heroic nature that is right there, fresh in each moment, and yet is this bold, beautiful continuum.
This is Zopa and Yeshe for PRAJNA SPARKS. Be sure to join us every month on the new moon for fresh episodes. Stay tuned now for a guided meditation. Shivnee is our Tibetan singing bowl artist.
Thanks for the generosity of giving us some time out of your day to like, subscribe, share, and review PRAJNA SPARKS. It really does help us to spread the gift of Dharma to new listeners. If you have any questions, contact us via email, Instagram, or Facebook. Check the episode notes for those links and for more resources on today's topic. Visit us on the web at prajnafire.com or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at PRAJNA SPARKS. Thank you for listening. May all beings benefit. Welcome, friends. When it comes to practice, oftentimes we may think practice is only about meditation, but in the very rich tradition of Buddhism, there's so much more to it than just meditation. Meditation, of course, is central, but there's practices that cultivate merit, that direct the goodness of anything that we do, channeling it towards the ultimate good for ourselves and all others. And one of the main ways that is accomplished is through the practice of aspiration prayers. This being the podcast to start the new year, Lamas Yeshe and I thought that we'd do the aspiration for Mahamudra by the third Karmapa.
What I particularly love about this prayer is that it really brings the full world of Buddhist practice, meaning all of our lives, into focus. You could say that Buddhist practice involves view, meditation, and conduct. We might be thinking of our Buddhist practice as the time we spend in formal meditation. And why wouldn't we? When that's a lot of what our society and possibly even our own Dharma centers focus on the most. But Buddhist practice is about a way of living, a way of being. And this includes our view, or what we believe, what we hold to be true, our meditation, or the cultivation of a mindset that lives out of that system of beliefs, and the conduct that actually embodies that belief system and the cultivation of that mindset. As we recite the aspiration prayer of Mahamudra, we invite you to recite with us. You can find a link to the English translation we'll be using by Ari Goldfield in the show notes. If you prefer, just sit and listen and drink in the words.
To begin, settle into your seat. Allow yourself to come to rest in clear, still alertness. Take a few breaths to ground.
Namo Guru, Lamas and Yidam deities of the mandala, victorious ones and your heirs of the 10 directions and 3 times, pray behold us with vast loving intent, and bless our aspiration prayers that they may be perfectly fulfilled. May the rivers of my own and all limitless others' gathered virtue that spring from the snow mountain of our completely pure intentions and actions, untainted by the 3 dimensions of action, flow into the ocean of the victorious one's 4 kayas. In this and all our future lifetimes, for as long as it may be until we manifest enlightenment, may not even the words negative action or suffering be heard, and may we enjoy the glory of oceans of virtue and happiness. In all our lifetimes, may we gain the supreme freedoms and resources, and have faith, diligence, and prajna. May we rely on excellent spiritual teachers, and having received the nectar of their instructions, may we practice accordingly and encounter no obstacles in doing so. May we always practice the genuine Dharma. Listening to scriptures and reasonings frees us from the obscurations of ignorance. Contemplating the key instructions vanquishes the darkness of doubt. Meditation's light illuminates the true nature just as it is. May the brilliance of the 3 kinds of prajna increase. The 2 truths free from the extremes of materialism and nihilism are the reality of the ground, and through the supreme path, the 2 accumulations free from the extremes of superimposition and denial, the fruition that accomplishes the 2 benefits free from the extremes of existence and pacification is attained. May we meet with this Dharma that is flawless and sure. The base of purification is mind itself, the unity of clarity and emptiness. May the great purifying Vajra Yoga of Mahamudra clear away what is to be purified, the fleeting stains of confusion. And may we manifest the result of this purification, stainless Dharmakaya. Eliminating superimpositions about the ground is confident view. Guarding non-distraction from that is meditation's essential point. Becoming expert in all types of meditation is conduct supreme. May we gain such confident view, meditation, and conduct. All phenomena are mind's magical play. As for mind, there is no mind. Mind is empty of essence. Empty and unimpeded, it can appear as absolutely anything. Analyzing excellently, may we cut through all superimpositions about the ground.
our own projections, never existent, we mistake to be objects. Out of ignorance, we mistake self-awareness to be self. Clinging to this duality makes us wander in the vastness of existence. May we cut through ignorance and confusion at their root. It is not existent. Even the victorious ones do not see it. It is not non-existent, being the basis of all samsara and nirvana. It is not the contradiction of being both. It is the middle way path of unity. May we realize mind's essential reality, free from extremes. No designation can show it is this. No refutation can demonstrate it is not that. May we gain certainty in the essential nature, transcending intellect, in the unconditioned and in genuine reality's ultimate limit. Not realizing simply this, one circles in the ocean of samsara. When one realizes simply this, there is no other enlightenment. Everything is this, and there is nothing that is not. May we realize essential reality, the underlying nature of the ground all. Appearance is mind, and emptiness is mind. Realization is mind, and confusion is also one's mind. Arising is mind, and cessation too is mind. May we determine that all superimpositions are mind. Unspoiled by meditation where thoughts are deliberate and striving, unmoved by the winds of ordinary commotion, knowing how to settle naturally in the uncontrived native state, may we be skilled at and sustain the practices revealing mind's true reality. With the waves of coarse and subtle thoughts dissolving in their own place, the placid river of mind gently comes to rest. Free of the silt and mire of dullness and torpor, may the ocean of shamatha be steady and undisturbed. Looking again and again at mind that cannot be looked at, unseeable reality is seen vividly, just as it is. Cutting through all doubts about whether it is or it is not, may we unmistakably recognize our own face. Looking at objects, there are no objects. They are seen to be mind. Looking at mind, there is no mind. It is empty of essence. Looking at both, clinging to duality is self-liberated. May we realize mind's abiding nature, luminous clarity. Free from mental contrivance, it is Mahamudra. Free from extremes, it is the great middle way. Since it encompasses everything, it is Dzogchen. May we gain the confidence of realizing all through knowing one. Free of attachment, great bliss is unceasing. Free of clinging to characteristics, luminous clarity is unobscured. Transcending the intellect, non-conceptuality is spontaneously present. Without effort, may these experiences be unceasing. Clinging to excellent experience is free right where it is. Negative thoughts' confusion is naturally pure in the expanse. When ordinary mind manifests, there is nothing to adopt or reject, no freedom or fruition. May we realize the truth of Dharmata, free of fabrications. Beings by nature have always been Buddhas. Not realizing this, they wander endlessly in samsara. May we have unbearable compassion for all sentient beings whose suffering knows no bounds. This unbearable compassion radiates unceasing love, and as it does, its emptiness of essence nakedly shines. May we never leave this supreme and unerring path of union. May we meditate upon it all day and all night. From the power of meditation comes superior eyes and clairvoyance, the ripening of beings, complete cultivation of Buddha realms, and fulfillment of prayers to attain Buddha qualities. May we attain the enlightenment that brings ripening, cultivation, and fulfillment to perfection.
by the power of the great compassion of the victorious ones and their heirs of the 10 directions, and the power of all the immaculate virtue there is, may my own and all sentient beings' completely pure aspiration prayers be perfectly fulfilled. We wish you all a glorious new year filled with peace, love, and understanding, and hope you will make bold, bountiful, beautiful aspirations for yourself and your practice in the year to come.
Namaho Sarva Mangalam.
Sarva Mangalam. May all be well.
Whatever goodness has come from this practice, please share it now with all beings that we may all benefit.